to say, just as James does, and endurance produces character. Character. So the development of our character, the character in our lives, is connected to the sufferings that we endure that are permitted or given to us by a God who loves us and is a father to us. In character, he goes one step further than James. He says in character actually produces hope. This is really powerful. We can find hope in this life. We can anticipate good things into our future, which opens up the opportunity for us to be joyful because of the suffering that has been permitted into our life, the steadfastness, the endurance is produced, and the character it develops. And the hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who's us in abundance, that will produce this joy and hope in our lives. So ultimately, the big idea that I want you to walk away with today as we think about suffering is that the suffering that is brought about in your life is from God. It's for the production of endurance and steadfastness. It develops your character and makes you joyful and hopeful. That is a great progression. So here's what you're supposed to know about suffering from the Christian perspective. Romans 5, James 1, suffering is inevitable. We're told that right from these passages. Suffering is inevitable. It's going to be a part of all of our lives at various levels. You know, we watch some people who suffer tremendous difficulty. We look at their lives and we can't imagine going through the things they've gone through, yet they find themselves to be joyful. It's hard for us to understand. And we go through sometimes things that are difficult to us, but other people might look at them and say, that's nothing. I've been through a lot more than that. And it can crush us. You know, so it's very subjective at times how the suffering feels to us as individuals. So suffering is inevitable for us at various levels, no matter how severe it is. It feels severe in the life of the one suffering. Suffering is inevitable. Romans 5, James 1. Also, suffering is purposeful. That's something else I want you to see. We talked about that already, but there's always purpose in our suffering. Suffering isn't wasted. The problem in many Christians when they face suffering is that they feel like it's arbitrary. It's wasted. It's not useful. Think of how differently we might receive the suffering that comes into our life if we recognized it for what God says it actually is, something that's intended in our life to make us joyful. I mean, if we saw suffering coming down the road for us, and we were able to embrace it and receive it as something God was doing in us, we would find ourselves to be much more willing to learn the lessons that they're intended to teach. Suffering is not just inevitable, but it's purposeful. And the other thing I want you to see in suffering is that it always ends for the Christian in hope. Suffering, the end of our suffering is joy and hope in God. Produces steadfastness, brings completeness, produces character, brings hope. With that as a sort of preface, let's look at verse 18, the passage we're looking closely at today. Verse 18, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that's going to be revealed to us." So what Paul's doing here is he's starting the whole conversation about suffering off with it being a comparison. He's saying the sufferings that we're going to go through, those are small in comparison to the great reward that we will receive in God. So that's a way of helping us to receive those sufferings and them not land on us quite so heavily. So Paul, one who himself was acquainted with such suffering, with so much suffering, that he starts the conversation about suffering by saying essentially that the suffering we face, though it is difficult, though it's tough, though I don't mean at all to minimize the difficulty you're going through today, though it's difficult and tough, it's in a category that causes it to be really incomparable with the benefits that are produced from the suffering. It's in a category that causes us to see it as not even comparable, not the same as the benefits that are produced when one receives the trials and tribulations from God that bring about suffering. and ultimately eternal glory. In other words, what Paul's saying is, this is a crazy good deal. It's a crazy good comparison here. He said, yes, you're going to go through some things. They're going to be tough and difficult. And keep in mind, the person saying this is not a person who's not suffered. He suffered a great deal. We know of many, many trials and sufferings in his life. He suffered a great deal. And he says to us that those sufferings that he's been through are just very small in comparison to what he describes as the weight of glory. It's like this is feather light. The difficulties, the trials that we go through, even though they feel oppressive to us, they're feather light in comparison to the gravitas of the glory of God that is given to us through these sufferings and through the sufferings of Jesus Christ himself. So Paul talks about the issue as a really good deal we have here. Paul talks about this issue a bit more explicitly in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Why don't you just pause for just a second, scroll or turn. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 17 and 18, because this is one of those moments where Paul kind of, if you are able to cross-reference and look around, Paul kind of clicks and expands. He just touches on an idea here in Romans, but if you were to click on that and expand it to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 17 and 18, you'd see a bit more about what he means when he says that phrase. So this is 2 Corinthians 4, verses 17 and 18. So what Paul said here, remember, is that the sufferings don't compare. I consider the sufferings of this present time not worth comparing to the glory that's being revealed to us. Look at verse 17 and 18 now in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, and he's talking about the same suffering. He says, for this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So he describes the heavy, oppressive, difficult suffering you're facing right now, I'm facing right now, that we're sure to face further along in our life, the difficulties that are native to humanity and native to Christianity. These difficulties, Paul describes as a fellow sufferer with us as light and momentary. You see how what he has done is he's withdrawn himself to the bigger picture. He's backed up from the actual issue at hand, the difficulty and suffering. He's not staring at that. He's backed up from that, and he's put that in the context that it deserves to really be in our lives. He backed up from it, and he said, in comparison to all of the glory we are to receive in Christ Jesus, this thing we're facing is described as light and momentary. Nothing I go through feels light and momentary to me, unless I have the wherewithal to back up and see my light and momentary affliction in light of the eternal weight of glory. I mean, if I'm looking at the eternal weight of glory, the affliction looks light and momentary. But when I'm staring at the affliction, it looks huge. It looks like it's massive. It covers all of my life, so I can't see anything else. For this light and momentary affliction, what is it doing? The light and momentary affliction is doing a work. Remember, Paul's talked about it doing a work. James talked about it doing a work. What's the light and momentary affliction doing? It's preparing us for the eternal weight of glory. It's getting us ready to really enjoy God. It's getting us ready to really savor the goodness of God. He's saying, against the dark backdrop of suffering, the light of Christ shines really brightly. As we look not to the things that are seen, he continues on in verse 18, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. See, I was talking about zooming out. Not just seeing the things that are seen, like right in front of me, my sufferings, my difficulties, my distress, my problems, but zooming out from those and being able to see the things that are not normally seen when we focus so much on the difficulties and sufferings. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. This is a great idea. I mean, the things that are seen, they just kind of pass by us. But the things that are unseen, those are the rocks. Those are the eternal truths that will never change about our God. So this click and expand from Romans 8 to 2 Corinthians 4, 17 and 18 is a really important one for us to understand, because really what he's doing here is he's digging down deep into why the sufferings of this life, the difficulties of your day, are ultimately not ultimate. So the trick in facing trials is not to face those trials. I say that again. The trick in facing trials is not to face the trials. The trick in facing trials is to face glory. Let me ask for a little help this morning. I need 3 volunteers. Alex Chapman's got to be one of them. 2 more. Come on. All right, Amanda, come on up. One more. Okay, Terrence, of course. All right, here we go. You would expect these 3. Oh, man, I love these 3. Okay, so the idea here is pretty simple, okay? So, Terrence is going to be the eternal way to glory, okay?
Glory.
Way to glory.
Wait,
Eternal.
can I trade?
No, you can't trade. Amanda's going to be the light and momentary afflictions, the sufferings, okay? You knew it was coming. Okay? And Alex he's just going along in this life, right? He's going along in this life, and he's just focused on the thing that's happening, and all of a sudden, he gets smacked by a suffering. Now, what he does in this instance is really important for his overall perspective, isn't it? If Alex does what most people would do, he's going to turn head on here, and they're going to start waging war. We could just do this all day long, couldn't we? But if Alex does the other thing and he turns away from the suffering toward the eternal way to glory, and he embraces the eternal weight of glory, he's not going to deal with the sufferings of this life, the light and momentary afflictions. Thank you, guys. You crushed it, of course. That went way better than I expected. Usually those things go off the rails. They're hit and miss, but boy, that one was good. You get the point, though, that as we turn our attention away from those things that are light and momentary afflictions, according to Paul, as we turn our attention away from those things, they really can't capture our attention and our imagination. It's only when we stare at them and we engage with them that they capture so much of our lives. And let me tell you this. If you are spending any moment on the internet, everyone on the internet right now in an ultra-sensitized way is staring with all of their intensity at all of the difficulties. No one on the internet is talking about the eternal way to glory. So when you engage in social media, when you turn it on, you are saying, oh, I want to just swim around inside the sufferings of this life. I just want to live there and be entertained by it. And I want to see post after post after post after post after post after post until I just conk out in bed of the light and momentary afflictions. I mean, I don't even think we realize what we're doing. And I'm not throwing a grenade at you as somebody who does this, unlike me, who's holy, who's always reading my Bible. No. I'm a person scrolling the same thing. I find the same addiction in my heart. I have a fascination with the difficulties of this life. I want to see those. I'm amused by the difficulties of others. But my attention should be toward full on the weight of the glory of God. In so many ways, our posture towards suffering, our theology of suffering, will determine our experience in suffering. You see, you wake up every morning with the opportunity to look square in the face of your suffering, examine it from head to toe, wallow around in the pain of it, consider it again and again, or you have the opportunity, like Paul has said here to us, like his encouragement to us, to turn your face toward the eternal weight of glory. Look at Terrence, y'all. Turn your weight toward the eternal weight of glory. Look at the character it produces in you. Look at the purposes of God behind it that fuel it, that motivate it. It promises to allow, and when we do that, it promises to produce in us hopefulness and anticipation for God. Look at verse 19. Go to the next verse. For the creation waits with eager longing. That's what the creation does. We're the creation, right? We and all the rest of the world that are created beings, created objects. All the creation with eager longing looks. The creation waits with eager longing. What are they waiting for? The revealing of the sons of God. Now, that's a confusing phrase. I don't want you to get hung up on it. Two things I want you to understand about this. The phrase, the sons of God, is used elsewhere in the Bible. You see it in various places. It means various things. Often, it means angels. Okay, so if you were to see like in Job, there's also Genesis 6 talks about fallen angels and refers to them as the sons of God. So don't get confused. That's not what he's talking about here. Okay? What he's talking about here is a lot more on the nose. The sons of God is us. We're the sons of God. Okay, so we're the children of God. So it's not used to be like an image or an allegory. It's just very simple. It's the sons of God. The phrase at the end of the verse, "sons of God," is used elsewhere in the Bible, but for us here, the meaning is less complex. It's not meant to confuse you or to mix you up. Paul's talking about our sonship. Paul's talking about us, our restored, specifically, our restored bodies, our restored physical, mental, and spiritual perfection that will come later. So, at the end of that verse, in your mind, sub the phrase "sons of God," which could be a confusing phrase, with the revealing of our perfect eternal self. Okay? So, if the verse says, "For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of our perfect eternal selves," that makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? So I want you to see it and think of it like that. The revealing, the uncovering, the unveiling of our perfect eternal self. Now, we are very aware of our imperfect temporal selves, right? Are we not? We could talk about this on every level, but it manifests itself mostly in our bodies, in our physical bodies. We find ourselves wasting. We find ourselves aging and sort of falling apart. I don't know about you, if you're an adult, it's amusing to watch my kids who sort of have in their minds, like I did when I was that age, that their bodies are going to continue to get better and better and better until perfection. They don't know that it's a hill that has a crest. They're just not aware. So, because everything they know about this life is that the body gets better and better and better and better and better, but they're about to crest the hill, and I can't wait. It's going to be really exciting for that to happen. They think their metabolism is going to continue to get better. They think they can eat whatever they want, not exercise, not do anything. They just think they can keep going, but I know it's coming. I know the crest of that hill is coming. Our bodies are a way in which we can, in a tactile way, we can experience this truth that's going on here. At the end of the verse, sub in your mind, "sons of God," with the revealing of our perfect eternal selves. And as our bodies waste away and we become older and older and older, and we become more frail and more frail and more frail, it should produce this desire for the weight of glory in our lives that will deliver a perfect eternal body. Paul, again, he talks about this in 1 Corinthians. Paul describes our new resurrected bodies as, here's the language he uses, "for the perishable body will put on imperishable." He says the mortal body will put on immortality. So the thing that's wasting away will stop wasting away, and the thing that's dying will stop dying. Wow. That's how Paul is looking at the body that's coming. So in the phrase, when you see, "for the creation eagerly longs," they wait for that immortal to become, or the mortal to become immortal, the body to become sustainable. And then the second thing I want you to see about these verses, verse 19 there, "for the creation eagerly longs for the revealing of the sons of God," the revealing of our bodies, our new bodies in God. The second thing that's noteworthy is that the creation, us and the rest of the world, are to have our faces turned heavenward. We're supposed to eagerly long for eternity. This is what the passage tells us. As the creation who's living under the weight of our light momentary afflictions, we're suffering in this life. The suffering is intended to actually produce for us a longing for immortality. It's to produce a longing for life with God after this life. Yet, if we, using our illustration again, if we turn our face toward the difficulty and we focus only on that, and we don't think about the immortality offered to God's children from God, we will not be very heavenly minded. Heavenly mindedness doesn't come up when everything's safe and happy. If you find yourself struggling to imagine or think about heaven very much, well, it's probably because you haven't suffered quite enough. It comes up precisely when God's people suffer the deepest pangs of hurt. When we suffer, we begin to long for heaven. Now, I have not suffered much in my life. I mean, I've had a relatively charmed life. Physically, I've not been very sick. I've not had difficulties. I have a wonderful wife and wonderful children. I've not gone through a great deal of suffering in any stretch, by any stretch of the imagination. I've had light and momentary sufferings at times. I've gone through difficulties, but I've not suffered a great deal. But when I do suffer, when I go through something difficult, it wrecks me. Some of you know that I have had kidney stones a lot in my life. I mean, people ask me how many times have you had it? Over 17-year period of time, basically since the church has existed. I don't think there's a connection. Maybe there is. I don't know. I have pretty regularly had kidney stones, like, you know, currently right now, according to a CAT scan, I have a few kind of hanging out in there just waiting to hit me later. And kidney stones, they're no joke if you've not experienced it yet. I'm sure there's more suffering in this life, but not that I've experienced. And when I suffer with a kidney stone, when I'm completely knocked out, I mean, Jennifer could give you a testimony. I pace, I jump, I do anything. Like, it's so silly. I mean, to think about the sorts of things I do to try to relieve pain, none of it works. I just move around a lot. It happens like back here in my back, and it's just debilitating. And I groan. I groan like a dying dog. I mean, I just groan. And Jennifer puts up with it, and like she never sends me to the couch or anything like that. I mean, she's really, really kind. I told you she's wonderful. So she goes through all that with me. That's the most suffering I've ever had. And here's an amazing thing. I can be today great. I love this life. Never once thought about, wishing for the end of it in any way, shape, or form. And I can be half a day, like 12 hours, under the oppression of kidney stones. And literally, if there were a button, like an end your life now button that I could press, I would press it. I mean, it's just all over. Like, just stop it right now. It goes away. I go to heaven. It's all over. Like, when I'm in real suffering, like, I'm done. I'm okay. I mean, it can take as short as 12 hours. I'm not joking. You think I'm joking. I'm not joking. I can go from happy and wonderful to suicidal in 12 hours under the kidney stone pain. It's that intense for me. And that might just show how weak I am, but I'm just here to tell you that's how I respond. The demeanor of my heart changes. I think, too, about Negro spirituals. I mean, I think about the important example that these songs teach us about the type of impulse that instills the spiritual fortitude in those who are suffering. You know what Negro spirituals are about? Virtually every one of them. I mean, if you go read the lyrics of Negro spirituals, those men and women who were under the oppressive hand of their slave owners, that were suffering day in and day out under physical and emotional distress, their response was songs exclusively about heaven. If you were to take if Matt were to take the songs that we sing and like put them all on a spreadsheet and categorize them by topic and sort it, out of 100, there might be 1 or 2 about heaven. If you were to do that with Negro spirituals, there'd be 99 about heaven. Is that a coincidence? No. Because what suffering is intended to produce in us is a longing for God. It's supposed to produce in us a longing for God, for a life without suffering, a life with God. Heaven wasn't a privilege possessed by the master class, but it was a promise sustaining those suffering under the weight of slavery, terrorized on this earth. The heavenly mindedness of the Negro slaves, as documented in their songs, was also a mark of that day's preaching. It wasn't just the songs, the preaching of that day by enslaved pastors was preaching largely about heaven. What we might look at and call a fascination with heaven seemed like all they talked about. Is that their only category of theology? Seemed like all they talked about, a fascination with heaven. It bled into even the... Jordan, what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. If you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home. Tell my friends I'm coming too, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot. Coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot. Coming for to carry me home. You see, they were longing for God. Begs the question, in our generation doesn't sing about heaven. If our generation doesn't sing about heaven, our sermons are about heaven, why is it? Why is it that